You are an achiever. It is wrapped up in your identity. You don't fail. You don't get the wrong answer. It's like, if you want to innovate, you have to get the wrong answer.
Right.
You have to make mistakes. You have to learn from them. You have to engage the unknown.
Welcome everyone to another episode of CEO's The Vault podcast. Today we are in a different setting, as you guys can probably tell, and I just want to give a special shout out to my man Eric over here for hosting us today. But today is a special day because we have a really cool special guest on today with us. His name is Mr. Costa Michailidis, co-founder at InnovationBound, my fellow mentor, and a fellow Baruch alum. So we want to give a big round of applause to our man, Mr. Costa Michailidis. All right. So Costa, I kind of want to start off by asking you, I kind of know who you are. We kind of have a general understanding, but our viewers may not. And so I just kind of wanted to know, who are you and what type of work is it that you do?
Yeah. Who am I?
I think that's a loaded
really
question,
good
right?
question. I'm Greek. And Greeks, I think, have been asking that question since ancient philosophers 2,500 years ago. So it's a legitimate question. And just to comment on society for a moment, I think we ask the question, what do you want as a default? And it's a little more consumerist. And who are you? It's so much more interesting, an underlying question to be asking yourself in your life. That's a really good one. My name's Costa. I'm Greek. I grew up in Astoria, New York, in this crazy melting pot. I went to Baruch for college. Life's taken a lot of interesting twists and turns. My career is centered around helping people use their creativity to solve problems they care about. And so if you imagine, like, who in this room solves problems for a living or solves problems at school, right? Okay, cool. So for most of those problems, they're going to be familiar things. They're going to be things you solve every day. It's your job to, check people out at the register or file reports or whatever it is. But once in a while, there are problems that are more complicated. They're harder. You don't know exactly how to solve them. That's where you have to start using your imagination, where you have to start getting inventive. That's the realm I tend to work in. I do this in three different sort of areas. One is with scientists. One is with businesses. And occasionally I get to do some international development work or work with nonprofits. But my job is always to help groups of people think creatively to solve wicked hard problems.
Wow.
Consulting in plain English,
right?
yeah.
Innovative
consulting.
creativity type of consulting going on. That's great. So your main project at the moment is InnovationBound, correct?
Yes.
That is a company that you helped co-found and everything. I kind of want to talk a little bit about that. How did InnovationBound kind of start? Why did you even create it to begin with? And I want to know about the mission at InnovationBound. What is the primary goal that you guys are trying to achieve?
Yeah, so InnovationBound came after No Innovation. So the science work had already been happening. We could talk about that later.
What's No Innovation?
No Innovation is KNOW Innovation. It was the first of, so there's three companies in our little family. There's about 30 of us that are consultants, and we work across these three companies. So the first one was the science-focused brand. InnovationBound was born afterwards, and it was aimed at taking the same things we were doing, helping scientists use creativity to solve problems, and aiming that at corporations and saying, hey, businesses are trying to be really innovative. Can we teach these same skills, these creative problem-solving skills to businesses? And that ended up being quite marketable. We started that in 2010, and initially InnovationBound was a corporate training company, and we taught innovation specifically. We did that at all levels of the organization. So we were teaching at the front lines, frontline leaders and individual contributors in organizations. We were teaching creative problem-solving skills. One layer up from there, you had sort of senior managers. They run a group or a department or a team. There you're teaching a little bit of how do you cultivate creativity in others? How do you manage for creative outcomes, not just productive outcomes? And then on up from there for directors and executives, other sets of skills like how to create a culture of innovation at your organization, how to manage a portfolio of innovation projects, and so on. So those are the sort of the programs that we created to teach innovation inside of companies. So we did that for a long time. We built up to a few $100,000 in revenue. We probably did millions of dollars of work over a bunch of years.
Wow.
And we quickly found ourselves self-employed. So we would do some sales, we'd get a bunch of work, we'd go do the work, and then no one would be doing sales, and we'd come back to. So we had some entrepreneurial skills to learn.
Right.
And so we're like, wait, no matter how good a training job we do at Coke, they don't tell Pepsi about us. or vice versa. So the marketing problem we hadn't solved. Okay. And so there was a back to the drawing board moment with InnovationBound. In parallel, the work in the science side was doing really well. So our focus shifted there for a little while. As we shifted back to InnovationBound, we took a different lens. And so now, in addition to the training side of the company, we have this sort of innovation adventures, projects of our own making side to the organization. And that's been really exciting.
Really?
So we have a project where we're working with a charity to launch mission-based sailing expeditions. There's another one that's built with a wildlife physiology professor to do a documentary on finding the wild within. Mm-hmm. And this is a way that human beings, like her students, can go out into extreme environments and do things to discover the wilderness in them, their natural instincts. So for example, we did free diving in Florida, and this was learning about your mammalian diving reflex. So inside of every human is a mammalian diving reflex. When you go in the water.
What is that?
Yeah, when you go in the water, a set of triggers and responses kicks in that adapts you to the aquatic environment. Humans have this, dolphins have it, manatees have it, whales have it. It's something like any vertebrate they've studied, or most vertebrates they've studied, and certainly many mammals have these instincts built in. And so the idea for our wildlife physiology professor friend, Amanda Wilson Carter, she's awesome, you can look her up. The idea for her was, can people, students or people in general, by connecting to the wild within themselves, connect better with nature and ultimately contribute to conservation in a more meaningful way?
Okay.
That was her hypothesis, her question. Yeah. And so she got involved with us for episode 1. This is all sort of very new and in the works for this particular project. But to bring it back to InnovationBound, the idea was, can we go out in the world and do these innovation projects? And does that solve the marketing problem? And these projects, can they be profitable on their own? And then on the back end, can we sell innovation training services? Can we teach people how to do these kinds of things? Whether that's develop a new product, create a documentary, change the way you handle costs at your organization, and so forth.
Wow. Mm-hmm. That is amazing.
Yeah, hearing your, what you're doing right now is just super interesting, and it's also super inspiring. But I was actually curious to find out what inspired you, what encouraged you to start, teaching innovation ultimately. How did your journey start?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it goes back to Mohammed's original question, this who you are thing. So I think a lot of my journey, and a lot of people who end up in careers where they love their job, and I certainly do, I think you find it all out in reflection. So like you end up at a point that's good, and you look back and you go, how did I end up here? It's not like you decided going forward, I'm going to get here, and then 5 years later you get to the place you thought you were going to go. I'm not that good. Maybe some people are. So for me, it was definitely in reflection. I feel like somewhere in my late 20s, when InnovationBound was doing pretty okay, like doing quite well. Not where we wanted it, but doing well. I looked back and asked myself how I ended up there. And I kind of had always been doing training and facilitation. I was doing it with a student org at Baruch when I was there. I was doing it later as a professional storyteller. I worked this job for a summer as an internship. Really interesting job. Storytelling skills are so important.
May I ask you, what is professional storytelling?
Yeah. So I worked at this boutique consulting firm, and they taught people active listening and personal storytelling skills.
Okay.
And so here's the quick workshop. Ready? So there are 2 components to this. One is you have to speak to the senses.
Okay.
So if I tell you a story about one time when I was hungry, I say, okay, I had a really long day, and I got home, and I went inside, and I was so hungry. And I went to the kitchen, and I looked in the fridge, and there was a giant piece of chocolate cake. And that felt really good. That's a bad story. But if I said, after an 8-hour shift on my feet all day long, I grasped the handle of my apartment, pulling it down with the strength I had left, thrusting the door open and lumbering inside. I get into the dimly lit kitchen, grasp the handle of the refrigerator, swing it open, and in there was a amber, dark, delicious looking. Yeah, it's once you add all those speaking to the senses, it changes the way the mind, the person listening, engages with it.
You get
they
to
can
reel them
imagine
in.
it at that point. They see every detail that you've seen, and you put them into that world that you were in.
Exactly.
The imagery, the imagery in the setting that you said is just.
Yeah.
I pictured every moment. I thought it was me going into that room,
Right.
that dimly lit room, and then I see the amber. It's pretty cool.
That's the idea. So you're speaking to the senses, and I think it has something to do with mirror neurons, but don't quote me on the science here. There's enough to, you could go research storytelling and mirror neurons and things like that. There's some good data out there, but safe to say, humans have been telling stories for like tens of thousands of years.
Right.
This is part of us. So one component is speaking to the senses. The other one is answering the question, what happened next? If you are answering the question, what happened next, you are narrating. You are telling a story. If you're analyzing or providing supporting details to make your point, like you do in an essay in college, you're no longer narrating. That's no longer storytelling. And it's okay. That could be another thing. That could be philosophy. It could be something else wonderful, but it's not storytelling. And what's really cool about storytelling is it makes its way into your social life. It makes its way into your writing. It makes its way into your career. It makes its way into your psychology. Like, storytelling appears to be at the basis of the whole subjective world. So if you divide the world into two parts, there's an objective world. We use science and engineering to understand the objective world and facts from falsehoods. Cool. But then there's a subjective world. Is that painting more beautiful than this one? Well, I don't know. But I know that if I'm in a museum and I walk up to a painting and there happens to be a good looking girl there who I want to talk to, and I look at the painting and I go, how beautiful is this piece from so-and-so, so I can spark up a conversation, when really I don't actually think that's true about that painting. I'm being disingenuous.
Right.
I'm now lying. I'm being deceitful. So it's a matter of opinion, but truth plays a role in both these realms. And so just to pull that all sort of back, the storytelling gig was about finding the subjective world, like the world of subjectivities and opinions and thoughts and emotions and feelings and psychology, and finding a basis there. So that was a really cool part of the journey. And I think the way I found myself to my career was in reflection. I was looking back and I was like, what are all the things I got involved in? And it's like, well, in every one of them, I was trying to create some kind of change, and I was using my creativity to try to do that, or helping other people to try to use their creativity to do that. And so for me, the answer to that question came after I had already done it. And I think it happens that way for most people. You find yourself somewhere in your career and you ask how I got here, and you look back and you're like, oh, I always had this kind of instinct or this kind of interest or fate or talent.
And did you realize these interests at Baruch? Or just a little shout out to our college. Right
Yeah, almost certainly. Baruch was awesome. So Baruch is the most diverse school in the country. I think they compete for first and second place with somebody or something like that.
Wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah, and
Pretty diverse, I would say.
depending on how you measure and all that, I think Baruch has students from more countries than any other school, certainly on that metric. I don't know about like ethnic background, but you hear multiple languages just walking around the school. It's awesome. And then it's got the hardest working people I've ever met in my life.
Absolutely. That's 100%. Something I'll give Baruch is every student there is giving their 120% there, always.
Yeah, easily.
Yeah.
And you got students working 2 jobs, paying for school, going full time. I mean, you're talking about 12-hour days every day and then working on the weekends. I mean, that's the caliber of person you are side by side with, and it makes you want to work harder.
I mean, Baruch really does breed the next generation of leaders, free thinkers, business leaders, and everything. And, you know, even though sometimes Baruch is often seemed to be like really hard, what it kind of prepares you for is it works out your work ethic. You know, it's like kind of like a workout. You can't just be stagnant all the time. And Baruch kind of has these things where they throw it at you, some twists and turns. I know we've all faced them at Baruch. But nonetheless, it really does help you develop a skill set to make you more adverse and resilient, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly got that at Baruch.
Right.
And then the diversity one's really cool because there's a lot of talk about diversity out in the world right now. And not to engage that entirely, but diversity was very genuine at Baruch. It was a very real intercultural experience. You were getting to know another person's values, way of life. You're eating their food, wearing that. We had these events called Global Village, where like people would show up in their like ethnic dress from wherever they're from, and you did the same. And you'd go around and eat foods from like 50 different countries.
We did that for our Armenian club and before the pandemic. But
that's awesome.
It's beautiful, just sharing the culture with other people and getting to
Absolutely.
learn about others' backgrounds that basically nothing about. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, so it's real in that way, and I appreciated it. Yeah.
I kind of also want to dive back into maybe before like InnovationBound, maybe before the boutique consultancy that you had. Did you ever have like any odd jobs or jobs that you were just sitting there and you're just like, man, I have to kind of get out of here, or a job maybe that gave you a skill set that you didn't know you needed?
What sparked the entrepreneur in you?
Right.
Yeah, these are good questions. So the only thing that ever gave me like a really bad taste in my mouth was I ran for U.S. Congress.
Oh, no
That gave
way.
me yeah, that was a horrendous experience.
How did that go? Can you talk a little bit
I'll
about
tell
that?
you, I got to the end of it. I was at the gym and I bumped into my cousin. He goes, "Hey, how's the run for Congress going?" And I was like, "I quit." He was like, "Oh, all right. Are you glad you did it?" I was like, "Yeah, I learned a lot." He goes, "You met cool people?" I was like, "No." Geez, from the volunteers all the way up to the people in power, I think I met one person who I would ever want to see again.
Really?
Old Jewish gentleman who ran the community for like the Democratic community for some local thing or whatever. But the volunteers on both sides, Republican and Democrat, were so wildly entrenched in just the platform ideas. Like it was like entering a cult of some kind. I don't know. I got a horrible, like I knew it was bad because we all look at politics and we're like, oh, this is bad. And then you go in and you're like, ugh, like
It's a lot worse than you
it's
thought.
repugnant. You're just like, ugh, you want to leave. So that was the only thing I sort of dipped my toes into where it seriously gave me a bad taste in my mouth. Firsthand experience. No, forget the data. I don't know anything about the data, but firsthand experience was real bad there.
Well,
Yeah, did that answer your question, or did it take it in a different direction?
It did. I mean, just trying to understand, like, so you could have taken many paths in your life, right? So all InnovationBound is just like consulting and a lot of helping out other people. You could have gone into a consulting firm where you'd work with different businesses like McKinsey or like Bain. You could have gone into therapy, psychology, and stuff like that. What pushed you to go out, create your own? Like, was there like a problem that you saw that was missing a solution? Is that what it was?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for repeating the question too. I guess I'm missing it because it's something natural for me. Like entrepreneurship is definitely a natural instinct for me. Anytime I've worked a desk job or sort of worked for someone else, something just felt wrong. I didn't have enough control over the thing I was creating or working on. I have experienced really good leadership. Carly Lewis is a shining example. There are many others. Isaac, USMC. She's living in Hong Kong now, doing something with wine, I think.
Ooh, that sounds cool.
But she was just a shining example of like good organizational leadership. She was the executive director at a charity I worked for or worked with, volunteer during college. Isaac, another shout out. Isaac's on campus at Baruch. So I have experienced really good leadership, but I definitely didn't like. It never felt right being in a large organization, being a cog in the wheel.
Yeah, because a lot of our members at CEO, they struggle with that all the time. The concept of like, oh my God, should I go just find a stable job where I'll get paid this much an hour and I'll be happy, or should I actually go out and try my hand, risk it all? Because for Baruch students, many don't come from very rich families. We can openly say that. It's known for that. A lot of them come from Queens, like Astoria. A lot of them come from Brooklyn, Bronx, and they're the next leaders, the next kind of the people who will be stepping into their families, creating those families. So for them, taking that risk is a very difficult one. So I just want to understand, like, your natural entrepreneurship. Did that kind of like push you to go out and be an entrepreneur, or were you okay with, like, were you never thinking of getting a job ever?
Yeah, so I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. My father started a construction company here in New York with his father. My brother and I worked at the company for a time. My brother more than me. So I kind of grew up around it. It was always sort of natural. I think, there's a couple things to comment on there. So the one about people thinking about taking the risk, I don't know the right advice to give, so I won't give any, but I know there's some options here. If you take the risk early, then it's easier to take the risk. You don't have kids you need to support yet. most often. You don't have a lot of money in your savings that you're going to chew through while you're doing the entrepreneurial thing. So there are good reasons to try out entrepreneurship early. There are also some decent reasons to do it later. If you know enough about what you want to do, or which audience, which customer group you want to go to work for, if you know enough about that, then you might be able to be quite strategic about the path you take. You might say, I want to start my own fashion brand. Cool. Starting the fashion brand right away might not be the way to do it. It might be go get a job somewhere else as a designer. So it might be develop a network first and then leverage that network. So you're going to use 1 or 2 jobs to get that network going. So there might be more strategic approaches. So I think depending on what you want to do or how you want to try it, that's worth it. I hope that entrepreneurship programs at university are getting better at this.
That's what we are.
Yeah,
we're
because
the entrepreneurship program with the
like your graduation criteria should be, my business takes up more time and pays me more money than the school.
Right.
Like,
I love that.
that's the graduation criteria. If that hasn't happened, you haven't acquired the skills to do it yet, right? That's
right.
The consolation prize, which isn't a bad one, is you acquire a set of business skills that can make you an independent contractor. So maybe you're not starting a new business; it doesn't exist yet in the world, and it's this brand new thing, and all. But you have a new skill set to approach, contract work with, and you can manage your own accounting, you can manage your own books, you can manage your own brand, and be an independent contractor. That's not a bad place to be. I did that for a good long time. In the consulting space, so independent contracting.
Wow. So now I kind of want to move the conversation a little bit to 2 important words in your life, 2 things that you kind of work with very well, and that is creativity and innovation. And I will kind of want to take a moment here and kind of get your understanding. What is creativity to you, and what does innovation entail?
Yeah. Okay, so let's give some definitions. So innovation is a word we use to describe something which is both new and useful. So we all accept that an iPhone is more innovative than a ham sandwich.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? Unless, of course, that ham sandwich was very unique and interesting in the way it was presented, and maybe it's super tasty and delicious and it's healthy for you, and there you go. It's unique. That's the newness factor. It's tasty. That's value. So can you have an innovative ham sandwich? Yes, I haven't come across one yet, but theoretically possible, right? Just a really delicious one that does something totally different than what you've seen before. So those 2 factors, when they show up, we tend to call those things innovative. Innovation is also the word we use to describe the process that we engage in to produce those new and useful outcomes. These are a lot of very generic words. So I'm not saying product, I'm saying outcomes, because innovation is agnostic to what you're trying to create. You might be trying to create a change in the culture that you live in. And so there's no artifact that isn't a book or a movie or music. That's, it's a more abstract outcome, still counts. So giving just sort of very generic, very abstract definitions, but those are the 2 components for innovation. Is it new and different? Is it valuable or useful? Yes, it's innovative. And the more sort of radically new it is, and the more radically useful it is, the more likely we are to call it something that's innovative. If it's only sort of incrementally so, we might not even use the word. We might say, okay, that's an incremental improvement. Cool. Okay, so on the scale of innovation, it's lower on the scale. So that's innovation. Creativity is everybody. Creativity is what's inside of you. Everyone's born with this. Picasso said we're all born artists, or something like that. The problem is to remain an artist as you get older. So creativity is a way of thinking that's in all of us. And when we teach creativity, what we're really doing is pulling at something that's already there, dusting it off because you haven't used it in a while, and then offering a little bit of skills and tools and techniques so you can sharpen it. Creativity is one very necessary individual skill to do innovation in the world.
So you kind of, these 2 kind of interrelate with one another, right? You kind of need creativity to maybe create something that's innovative. And that's a beautiful relationship that you see. So I also wanted to ask you, what's like your favorite innovator? Do you like look at somebody's like, that's an innovator that, I aspire to be like, or whatever this person may have done is totally out the ballpark?
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a long list of people doing very interesting things. For me, it's the Wright brothers.
Really?
You go all the way back to 1900. So, okay, there's a fun story. They achieved powered flight. I could tell stories about the Wright brothers for the next hour, so stop me whenever you're good. They achieved powered flight in 1900. Oh, I'm going to forget the date. 1901, I think, could be 1903. But in 1909 or something like that, I wish I was better with these dates. Wilbur Wright, it was September. Wilbur Wright shows up to New York City for some sort of festival. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to demonstrate flight. People had caught wind, kind of, sort of, read in the newspaper, this people are flying. Yeah, right. And really? Okay. And so they show up to demonstrate it in New York. There was another flight enthusiast there that was like a competitor of theirs. And that guy rolled off into the fog early in the morning, said he took off and then got scared and came back down or something like that. So we don't even know if that guy flew. But Will Wright goes up in what was then probably the Wright Flyer 2 or whatever their current model was at the time. He takes off at Governor's Island, flies along the promenade in Brooklyn. I think it's called the Promenade. I forget that neighborhood, but right against the edge of Brooklyn, comes up on the south tip of Manhattan, flies a loop around the Statue of Liberty, and lands back on Governor's Island.
Wow! And that was revolutionary at the time.
Yeah, that did it. Everyone's like, wait, what? And the same day, the other flight enthusiast was supposed to fly up the west side of Manhattan and back down. That was his route he was supposed to do. He didn't do it. He didn't want to, or the plane wasn't working. I don't know. But Wilbur Wright goes up to do it. And he flies up the west side of Manhattan. And by now, half of New York City had caught wind that this is happening. Mm-hmm. So his population was 1 million or something at that point. And everybody rushes over to the west side of Manhattan to see this thing. If Manhattan were like a cruise ship, it would have rolled over. It was amazing. That's the day we found out the impossible was possible. That's the day the world found out we could fly. Several years after they actually pulled it off, which is interesting. Not only do you have to imagine the innovation and then sweat for years to actually pull it off, you then have to succeed at the marketing. Mm-hmm. You then have to tell the story. And without that piece, it's not really complete. So definitely my favorite. And I can bring up more stories as they become relevant in describing what they did, what their attitudes were like, what their habits were like that made them such good innovators.
Wow.
Well, but to kind of put it into perspective, if I'm not wrong, they were just bike shop owners or something, right? So that kind of really just tells you that if you really put your mind to it, it's really not far from possibility. You can just go ahead and do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're just bicycle shop owners.
And one day they woke up I want to fly today. I want to be like a bird.
The scientists at the time had, quote, proven that flying wasn't possible for us.
Wow.
They were like, maybe if you build a small thing like the size of a watch, it can fly. But once animals get big enough, they can't fly. Mm-hmm. And so these scientists who looked up in the sky and didn't see anything big thought it wasn't possible. And they had math. They had written formulas on the square area of the wing has to change in proportion to the, I forget the exact math, but it was if the object gets heavier, the wings can't possibly get big enough. And so they must not be able to fly. Clearly, the science wasn't up to par. But yeah, it's shocking who is the innovator in the field. And sometimes you look and it's really that person? What? But that's exactly how it works sometimes. Wow. And that should serve as encouragement to everybody who wants to try something new in their life.
Absolutely.
So how does creativity and innovation affect an entrepreneur? Or do you think that these are something that entrepreneurs should really hone in on their skills with? Can it really propel entrepreneurs to the next level in being more creative and thinking about how they can innovate their product or whatever service that they're selling?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So absolutely, creativity is probably necessary, not only important, but necessary for entrepreneurship. And innovation, depending on what style of entrepreneurship you're doing, you can start, for example, a franchise restaurant. Mm-hmm. And there's probably not a whole lot of innovation that's happening. And that still counts as entrepreneurship. It's cool. Or if you're, let's say you're a musician and you're making a new song or a new album, there's creativity in that. But can you follow all the normal business practices? Probably. So you don't necessarily need to innovate anything new. So yeah, that's the straight answer. I do want to place it in context though, because the context is helpful.
Okay.
So in human society in general, Scientists are engaged in developing new knowledge. Engineers take that new knowledge and make new technology. And entrepreneurs take new technologies and make new products and services. Now, I'm using the word scientist, engineer, and entrepreneur here loosely because discovering things is not relegated only to PhD scientists. Like lots of people discover things. But generally, when you are observing the world and looking for new patterns and discovering how things work, you're doing science. And that's how new knowledge comes into the world. Market researchers are doing scientific studies or scientific-like studies to discover new things about the marketplace. So that's new knowledge. And then new technology, so the web is this like giant piece of new technology. Not so new anymore, I guess, 30, 40 years old. But an incredible piece of technology that anybody who's doing entrepreneurship, online businesses, is leveraging in order to deliver those new products and services. That's the tech you're using. And so that context is something to think about. So as an entrepreneur, you want to think about, well, which technology am I using? Which knowledge is that, if you want to know, which knowledge is that based on, and then ultimately you're producing a product or a service that doesn't exist for a marketplace.
Wow. That is phenomenal.
A lot of times people seem to I know that innovation is necessary for entrepreneurship, but some people seem to think that they're basically the same thing. What are the differences between like innovating and being an entrepreneur, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, you end up in the world of semantics, and you use words to mean what you want. You could define your terms at the beginning of a conversation to keep things clear. So I think there is at the end of the day, it's totally fine as long as people understand what you're talking about. You can use the words however you like. I think in the way I think about it, entrepreneurship is the creation of new products and services and bringing those to the marketplace. So the creation of new value in markets. Innovation is more general for me. So entrepreneurship is within innovation. It's one type of innovation. But if you're inside a large organization and you're implementing a new program to reduce your costs, that's innovation. If you're in art and music and you never take a penny for the work you create, but you're creating work in entirely new ways, you're still innovative.
Wow.
The creation of the airplanes and innovation, it wasn't an entrepreneurial venture. They struggled with what to do with their invention.
That's true.
They were trying to like sell the scientific knowledge. They were trying to sell the data. And then they eventually went toward military. It was very strange. I wish if I could go back and sort of poke them in the shoulder, I would tell them, hey, go straight to consumer.
Right.
Get this into people's hands.
Like you're able to fly now.
Yeah, wouldn't that be awesome? We'd have
amazing.
flying cars a
I'm
whole lot
still
sooner.
waiting for flying cars. I've been promised this since I was a kid, and for some reason it's still not here. Actually, to be fair, there is a new prototype that's been out, and
They come out with prototypes every 3
Right.
years, but they're not really like anything.
I just need a commercial flying car at this point. I want to zip through New York City skyline in a nice Benz.
Maybe, oh, that would be cool. Maybe drones.
Drones? You think so?
Maybe that's the beginning of it. I don't know. Because they're still small, but you can imagine them scaling up as
Right,
the
right.
energy.
Like the ones they made a prototype, just like the one in Star Wars with the hover thingies, where you can get hover bikes, and like they made a big drone where you can get on it like a motorcycle and just fly off.
Oh no way!
It
That
works.
is so cool. Have you
But-
guys ever? This, I know we're drifting off the topic, but have you guys ever seen like the jet, like the water jets that you can like kind of fly over water using like water jets? Basically,
Do the people who use them look like Iron Man?
Yeah,
Okay,
basically.
yeah.
They
Oh
have, like,
yeah,
the
yeah,
whole
the
Iron Man
ones,
suit
yeah,
on.
they come out with like
Right.
I've seen those.
Um,
Have you seen the ones that go like underwater though? Like they become little tiny submarines.
Yes.
That's crazy.
Wow.
Like
So-
they're like little tiny like jet skis.
Uh-huh.
One person fits in it, and you go underground, like underwater.
Talk about innovation.
Ooh, I gotta
right
look
there.
those up.
Like it's like a glass thing.
It's
crazy.
moving too fast.
Yeah.
Right. So there seems to be always like a chatter about being productive versus being creative, right? Some people take on both of them like, oh, if I'm being productive, that's the same thing as being creative. But I think you'd argue that they're two entirely separate things. Is that correct to say?
Yeah, they are different. Organizations struggle with this. So let's say you're running a company and everyone's really productive. Everyone's doing their jobs and they're working 40 hours a week, maybe more sometimes.
Right.
And the company's turning a profit, so everything's okay. And then Netflix comes out and you're Blockbuster Video. right? What do you do? Does anyone Blockbuster? Are you guys too young?
Yeah,
Blockbuster?
we know
Yeah,
Blockbuster.
yeah.
just
Blockbuster was still a thing when we were kids. Don't worry.
All right,
and then
cool.
Netflix just came along, you know.
So Netflix rolls around, and now there's disruption in the marketplace. So now you're in charge of Blockbuster. You're running this organization that has products in the market. You're turning profit. You're doing okay, but everyone's working at capacity. This is a highly efficient operation. Everyone's really productive, but no one has time allocated to being creative. No one has any resources allocated to that. What do you do? And so that's that polarity, is how do you stay productive but allocate resources to be creative? In Blockbuster's case, to deal with disruption in the marketplace, or to perhaps even keep up with it, or get ahead of it. Maybe getting ahead of that disruption would have been really cool for them. And so the story we've all watched is the one where they didn't manage that well enough. I think they did try. There are a couple of articles that try to go deeper than the surface level, like Blockbuster did nothing and then they died. Well, they didn't do nothing. They tried. There were efforts. Yeah.
Right. Wow. So, as you just said, right, with productivity and creativity, it can kind of be counterintuitive when people are trying to be too productive, right? Again, putting in those 40-hour work weeks, it kind of takes away from you actually being creative and being like a free thinker. So what are some exercises that you think people could do to kind of enhance your creativity?
Yeah. Let me jump back real quick to the previous question around. So one of the things with the polarity is, like, it's not a perfect trade-off. It's not like every hour you put to creativity takes 1 hour away from productivity. You can get beyond that. So let's say the least productive hours in the week are like Friday afternoon.
Right.
It's like, everybody does terrible work in my company Friday afternoons. It's the best we can get out of them. Good. Make that the creative time. Give them their first 5 hours of creative work to do in the 5 hours that are least productive. And you might not get the best creativity out of them, but that's your lowest loss, and you're getting, creativity you weren't getting before. So you can make the trade-offs in ways where you don't lose as much as you gain. You can gain more than you lose. So that's the polarity management. There are whole courses on polarity management. It's an interesting sort of theme in organizational psychology and organizational development. To go to your next question about creativity, how to train it.
Yeah, basically, one of the programs, one of the things that you guys do is you kind of help people become a little bit more creative, right? Mm-hmm. Or having more creative solutions and stuff like that. But I kind of want the audience to kind of see, how do you train somebody to be more creative? How does that even work?
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. This is just to illustrate. So, and if you're listening, you can follow along too. So go ahead and throw 3 fingers up and think of 3 different superhero powers. Try and think of 3 superpower ideas. And once you've got them, let me know.
All right, I got my 3.
You got them. All right, throw your 3 fingers up. And if I say yours, put your finger down. So flying, super speed, super strength, walking on walls, walking through walls, time traveling, reading minds, controlling minds.
Gotta be more creative than that.
Breathing underwater, talking to animals, telekinesis, the power to score really high grades on your finals without trying. Did I get one?
Imagine.
All right, you guys still have one up. Very cool. So your score is however many fingers you still have up. And
Eric, you're so. Yeah. Can we know what you're? Yeah.
Earthbending, immortality, and the last one was electricity.
Oh, really? Very cool.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Victor, what about you?
I had invisibility, and then
I had the same one.
That
was my last one.
Yeah, and then I had flying, and then I had going through walls and stuff like that. So.
Right, and I had the other 2 as well. I had invisibility, reading people's minds, and flying, because I think flying without a plane is pretty cool. Yeah. What about you? What were your 3?
So I didn't name any. I was doing the exercise, but I could name some wacky ones we've come up with in the past. But so the idea here is, if you ask the human brain to solve a problem, in this case, come up with ideas for superhero powers, it reaches for the most easily available things. So it remembers comic books you read as a kid, or TV shows, or a Marvel movie you just saw, or something like that. It'll reach for easy places.
I went straight for Avatar: The Airbender.
Right. Yeah. So it reaches for like these familiar places. And it does the same thing when you're thinking about new product ideas or what career you might be interested in your life. It reaches for common things. And so how much does that leave out? is the thought. It's like, well, almost everything. Like almost everything is the out of reach stuff. But your brain's lazy, so it goes for the easy stuff first. So one simple thing to do is you stay on task longer. So the first habit of great innovators is to come up with lots of ideas before you settle on the one you want to work with. So for superhero powers, it's going to take you a while before your brain goes, the power to vibrate my ears and amplify the Wi-Fi signal, or the power to harness political apathy as a renewable source of energy, or the ability to grow any vegetable I want in my beard. Like these are things your brain has to think for a while before it gets to. I did not think of those off the top of my head. They eventually came off the top of my head, but like over the years. So not doing that on the spot. And that's one habit of really innovative people, really creative people, is that they're coming up with lots of ideas before they settle on the one they want to go with, or combine, or there's a convergent phase of the process, which we haven't touched on. But that's
so would you say quantity is more important than quality when you're brainstorming?
It's almost like quality comes with quantity. And so when we measure and look at this, and there's some interesting studies on this, you see two factors. One, a larger number just statistically makes you more likely to have a good one in there. But also, as you go, they get weirder.
Right.
So the level of originality and novelty gets higher and higher. So if novelty is what you want, like let's say you're developing the menu for a new restaurant, you might want novel dishes, right? If that's on brand for you. Like if it's a burger joint and people are expecting burgers, then you might not need novelty. But if it's something new and people are expecting something different, and if it's a restaurant in a new part of the city with young people, I don't know, if you determine that novelty is important, then you get that as you go further along the brainstorming process.
Wow.
Remember with CEO, our club, we're starting a business, and the first ever things we decided to do was get everybody, all the members together, and do a brainstorming session of what business we should start. And the ideas that came along from it was 1 hour of brainstorming session, and we had ideas like a automated coffee machine where people can just like a vending machine for coffee. Someone threw out a Bitcoin ATM. Someone threw out ideas like
agave straws.
Agave straws.
Right,
yeah,
right.
It's like revolutionizing the plastic straws, getting them out. And
During that
some crazy ideas.
Right. And it kind of, and as you just said, as the time went on, the ideas were getting a little bit more crazier and
wacky,
weirder.
yeah.
Exactly. And then that's when every now and then you would hear an idea where you're just like, ooh, I've never even thought about that before. And it might just work. Who knows?
Yep.
But you mentioned
so so if you haven't tried this exercise, try this.
Okay.
Generate 100 ideas for a problem you have.
Wow.
It's going to take hours. It takes time. And you do it a little bit over the course of many days. Like if you're a writer, it's the next thing you want to write about. Or if you're an entrepreneur, it's a business you want to start. Just make a list of ideas and accumulate till you have 100 or more. And very weird things start happening in your mind. you just start seeing connections to things you could not see before. I have a blog post called 100 Wild Startups. So if you decide to do startup ideas, feel free to jump on that list and check those out for inspiration.
Would you say that's more effective if you do it over a short time span, or are you talking about like days and days of collecting the 100 ideas?
That's a really good question. I will go check the literature for that. I am almost certain there's a creativity psychologist who studied that. I don't have an evidence-based answer for you. My hunch is that both are comparable, both are good, and both are comparable. And I think that incubation, so if you come up with lots of ideas, but you take breaks, your mind will still be working on it subconsciously kind of while you're in the break. Mm-hmm. So that can be leveraged to be more productive. If you do one per day, I don't know that you're going to get creative outputs. I think you do have to go at it for a little while. That's my best guess judging on my experience, but I can go try to dig up and see if there's a real study on it.
Wow. I mean, I can definitely attest to that, right? Like once you're working on one problem for such a very long time, let's say you work on a problem for 2 days, right? You're spending one full entire day just figuring out the problem, trying to analyze it. You're creating up all these solutions, and then your mind is just constantly working and thinking about this one problem. So I'd have days where like I would go to bed and I'm dreaming about this problem, and I'm like, can I please catch a break here? And then you just wake up the next morning with a new refreshed mind, but because your mind was thinking about it in your sleep, whatever the case is, unconsciously, you kind of start to generate, you have a different outlook, and you start to generate some more ideas that you probably didn't have when you were first analyzing that problem. So I think that's such a beautiful thing that the human mind kind of does. Once we let an idea just let it sit there and fester in our head kind of just does the job of figuring it all out. And it's a pretty cool thing.
To add a little bit of academic backing to this, Teresa Amabile is at Harvard. She is a creativity psychology researcher. She has some interesting work on the components of creative outcomes. So when you look at people who've achieved highly innovative outcomes, you see three underlying factors that seem to be necessary. One is these creativity skills. One is thinking creatively. And there's more to it. There's an entire phase of the process, which is convergence. So let's say you have a pile of 100 ideas. You then have to think about, well, which one's best suited to my problem, and can I combine some of them, and how might we improve this particular idea? There's a whole second half to the process that we haven't touched on that's there. So those are the creativity skills. In addition, you need some domain expertise. If you're going to be innovative in fashion, you have to know a thing or two about fashion.
Right.
If you're going to be innovative in computer science, you have to know a thing or two about computer science. So those are the domain skills. And then the last piece is motivation. It seems to be necessary to have intrinsic motivation. You got to be in it for the thing, not for the money or the fame or anything else. You got to actually love the music, or the whatever.
You got to have
whatever
like a
the craft
passion, in
is.
other words, basically,
Exactly.
right? Okay.
But about the 100 ideas, like that really like interests me because it gets your brain really going. You really like kind of like have to force yourself to start thinking, and that's why we were playing in the library. We were out late until like 11 p.m. and these guys pull out a chessboard and start playing chess, and I was watching over them playing, and I was starting to think of like, okay, how many steps? What steps the next move? So I'm like, I'm gonna try like. Someone recommended me this a while ago, but I never did it. Play chess on your way to like to school on your subway ride.
Really? Why?
What?
Why?
Because like as Costa said, your brain is constantly thinking of the next move, the next step, solving problems. And with chess, you're solving like constantly every minute. You're solving another problem, always envisioning the next move, the next play. So that gets your brain moving and like exercising. It's really good for you.
You're saying it makes you a better chess player, or gets your brain moving and makes you a better thinker in general?
Thinker in general.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
So that's why he recommended me that. He said, just play chess every morning. Because even
cool.
like the smallest things, the smallest problem you solve, it gets your brain kind of like the gears moving. So
That gets me thinking, actually. This is super random, but like for athletes, is playing chess gonna be like really beneficial for them? Because in like team sports, the decision making, it happens like every second. You gotta decide like how you're gonna move, what you're gonna do. So maybe there's a correlation between like chess and athletes and like sports. It's super
chess
random.
is a sport.
It is.
You're not wrong. I'm just talking about, like soccer, basketball, and all that good stuff.
I wonder if anybody has studied that literally, the effect of chess on other sports and performance. So I'd be really
that's
curious
an
to
idea
see.
for you researchers out there now. So another thing that you talk about, you're a writer, you write articles. You're also a teacher of the sort, right? Kind of want to talk about, you have this course that you also offer at InnovationBound. It's called Innovation 101,
Correct.
I believe. And in this course, you mainly touch upon the 5 fundamental habits of great innovators. Now, I don't want you to give out the whole entire course here today.
No
People
worries.
can sign up in the link below. But can you just tell us quite generally, what are the 5 foundational habits of great innovators? Like, what are these habits? Why do these innovators usually gravitate towards these habits?
Yeah, we can do that. We already covered one of them. Before we do that, do you want to talk about NASA and
Sure.
and,
Yeah. Like,
some
let's
science stuff?
talk about that.
If you're up for it.
I have
Yeah.
a question about NASA. Oh,
Yeah, shoot.
Oh, sure. So, during your time consulting NASA, did you notice any like parallels between space exploration and entrepreneurship?
Ooh, interesting. So through No Innovation, that's one of our sister companies. We do work with scientists. we are working with groups of scientists to help them think creatively to solve problems. And we're doing that in workshop formats. So 3-day events, 5-day events. There's almost always an interdisciplinary group of scientists who are involved. And the host is typically one of the funding agencies. So here, NASA is a funding agency. They're funding scientific research to study space weather, the search for life beyond Earth. There are these things called CubeSats. They're like toaster-sized satellites. And they're tiny, but you can send up like a swarm of them, and you can arrange them in certain ways to do interesting things. So that was another piece of research. So I think when you go to work with scientists in general, you see the creative mind at work in science, and I think that's not very different from the creative mind at work in entrepreneurship. I think there's definitely a parallel there. There is a factor that scientists exemplify, which I think entrepreneurs need more of. And this hit me at an event at the UN once. So I was at the UN. It was a panel on innovation at the United Nations, and they had a bunch of different directors of different departments at the UN. And they went on for a while. And as a consultant, they hit all the buzzwords I'm supposed to listen for. They're like design thinking and agile and other methodologies. And I'm like, oh, okay, you check all the boxes. Cool. Like, they're doing great. They must have good consultants, or they must have good people in-house. And I was like, well, I wonder if they have the motivation right. So it seems like they've got the techniques in place. And they took questions from the audience buffet style. So they took like 10 questions or 20 questions. And then they invited the directors to answer whichever ones they wanted. So I got mine in there, and most of the directors commented on mine. My question was, okay, it sounds like you have the how to do innovation right at your various initiatives. What I wonder about is, what's the why? Why do people try to innovate inside of UN agencies? Like, what's motivating them? Where does their motivation to try to do something new come from? And in all of their answers, I heard the word achievement, achiever, goals to achieve, things we've achieved. I was like, boom, 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 boom. Why does that word keep coming up? I was like, oh, if you work at the UN, you had straight A's in college and high school and middle school and at the Model UN. It's like, you are an achiever. It is wrapped up in your identity. You don't fail. You don't get the wrong answer. It's like, if you want to innovate, you have to get the wrong answer.
Right.
You have to make mistakes. You have to learn from them. You have to engage the unknown. And sometimes, I don't mean to say everyone who's an achiever can't innovate. That's not really true. But sometimes if you wrap your self-identity up in achievement and you are unable to make a mistake, you can't engage in what the scientists are doing in the room every time I'm with them, which is this deep-seated curiosity. They just want to know how biology works. They don't care if they're right or wrong, or the next guy's right or wrong. That's just completely irrelevant. They just want to know how it works. And so they're coming at it with this deep curiosity. And an entrepreneur who's in love with their idea is missing that deep curiosity. And it's totally cool. Some entrepreneurs who are in love with an idea just make it work, right? They beat down the brick walls in their way and they make it happen. Totally valid path. But oftentimes that exhausts people. And what you would have benefited more from as an entrepreneur is just some curiosity about the market. Where you go, I built this little website or web app or tool or whatever it was, and people aren't using it the way I thought they were. How are they using it? Which value are they getting? Are they getting a totally different value than I expected? How cool is that? Maybe we could change the tool to adapt that way. So that, I think, was a big lesson from working with scientists, was around curiosity. The Wright brothers exemplified it really beautifully.
Right.
So to take it back to Wright brothers, they had built, this is before they achieved powered flight. So this is either 1899 or 1901 or something. They go down to Kitty Hawk to test their gliders. At that point, they hadn't slapped an engine on yet. They were just trying to glide and steer. And they were relying on some data from a German flight enthusiast. And the data was wrong. They go there, they measure, they're holding the gliders up, they've got their weights or their balances or whatever, and like the lift they weren't getting enough lift. And they're like, well, the wing shapes, according to his writings, these wing shapes should produce this much lift, and they weren't getting it. And instead of quitting, instead of getting frustrated and leaving it behind, any reasonable person who packed up their whole life in Ohio, took 9 trains and a boat or whatever they did to get to Kitty Hawk, built a shed on the beach to live in while they did this, battling clouds of mosquitoes. Like, there was no direct flight to North Carolina back then, obviously. So any reasonable person, would have quit, gone back to the bicycle shop and, took care of their investments and, managed their farm or whatever. They were unreasonable. they just got curious. Like, well, if these aren't the right wing shapes, what could the right wing shapes be? They built a wind tunnel. They tested like 1,000 different wing or 100 different wing shapes at thousands of different angles, and they got the data on their own. And then they went back, and it actually worked. They got the lift they were expecting based on wing shape. So basically, optimized the shape of the wing to get the most lift as it hit the wind. And so modern aviation still builds on this. I mean, it's essentially the same thing as their original discoveries. So they came at it with curiosity. And so curiosity is one of the attitudes that we teach in the course, though the course is based on the 5 skills. So mostly we attack those skills. Attitude is like the last component we want to teach in that course. And it'll be curiosity and courage. There's a whole segment on courage. It takes courage to do something innovative.
Absolutely agree to that.
I agree with that completely. Curiosity is the number one motivational forces out there to get why people explored the world. They were curious. They wanted to seek out adventure. They wanted to seek out everything.
Absolutely.
But I want us to comment on that. A lot of the people out there in the world, they have fear of failure. They can't afford to fail.
They're like the overachievers that you mentioned before.
Yeah.
Like, I cannot fail. That's their identity, right?
The people who work at UN, the people who are going to Baruch, some of these people just look at their lives and say, I can't afford to fail. I'm curious, but I can't risk it. I don't want to, what if I fail? And that fear of failure is kind of like a little kind of tiny demon like that says, okay, then don't do it. And it pulls them away from ever achieving anything that they ever wanted. So how do you think the solution for that is?
Yeah, I hesitate to lend advice. I have not walked a mile in everyone's shoes. I've walked miles in my own, and I don't know, maybe I can say I have for some people I know well. So I hesitate to give advice on what you can afford or can't afford to do. And there's a whole article on the website around efficient experimentation, which is an important skill. It's one of the 5. And they're like, you shouldn't max out all your credit cards and mortgage your home to start a business.
Yeah.
That's not courage. That's daring. Cool. Daring might be its own virtue, but I don't think that's the kind of deliberate and careful courage that we want to be doing. Like the Wright brothers didn't jump off of cliffs to test their planes. They're like, all or nothing. Like, well,
I think that was a good
not going to work. So, yeah. With that caveat, I think something you can do is you carve out a place in your life, a little bit of time, a few hours here, a few hours there, where you can work on the creative thing. So if you have your 40-hour, 50-hour week, 60-hour week job sometimes, can you carve out an hour each night to learn how to code and build your app? Or can you take a day on the weekends to work on your fitness business, one client at a time? I think if you can find a small way to start and measure what you're doing, measure your success as you go, it is possible to build a business and then ultimately transition over, quit the job, and go out on your own. Lots of people do it. I lived in my mom's basement for a good chunk of time. I mean, you're going to have to make sacrifices, and they might not be the ones you want to make as a college student, in your early 20s. Like, that's the last place you want to be. But that goes back to how much you want it. I mean, if entrepreneurship is what you want, you're going to sacrifice everything you can to get it, and you're going to do it. And I believe it 100% because it's who you are. So,
no, that was perfect.
And depending regarding opportunities, what's your take on innovation in, for example, developing countries? Because America seems to be the land of opportunities. There's so much capital. There's so many resources. But for other countries where it's a little harder to explore the opportunities and realize them, what's kind of your best way about going, about that?
Yeah. So, there's so many places with so much interesting stuff going on. I think different countries offer different things that are possible. We did some work with smallholder farmers across Latin America. And so that was a lot of fun. So the opportunities there were in agriculture, and there were cool, interesting things happening. Modern technology is far more accessible than we expect. So you end up being able to do product innovation in agriculture. So it's not like you have to follow the whole historical path the US did so you can get to the same place. Like Africa leapfrogged over telecommunications infrastructure. They went straight to cell phones, and they put up towers, and they never needed to connect phone lines in large parts of the continent. Obviously, the continent is hugely diverse, from Egypt to Sudan to South Africa to whatever, they're all different. Yeah. To answer your original question, sorry, we covered one of those skills. So, okay. So, I've spent about 15 years consulting with scientists and big businesses on their innovation projects. And in 15 years, I've realized creativity and innovation is not just for people with big budgets and people who work in shiny laboratories. It's for everybody. We all have problems we care about that require a little bit of imagination to solve. There are parents out there trying to teach their kids healthy habits. Right. There are people who are looking for love while trapped at home during a pandemic for 2 years. These are problems that require a little bit of creativity. We all have them. Growing a small business, growing your Instagram following, whatever it is. And so the reason to build the Innovation 101 course was exactly that. It's like, hey, we have this world-class training program going out with big organizations. Can we take that same knowledge and make it available to people around the world? And obviously, we're starting in English. We're starting with a website. We're starting with the Innovation 101 course. And the hope is to reach 1 million people. My goal is to reach 1 million people with it.
Right. Wow.
So we just started, just launched. Pricing is early bird. It's $35. So
you heard that,
for
folks?
the price of an expensive dinner, that's not expensive anymore.
That is
that's
not too expensive
Not
to
anymore.
build really the foundational habits of transforming the way you think. And you can kind of argue to say that these habits are not bad habits. These are great habits, and these habits can really help propel you and taking that business to the next level. You know, a lot of people, when they have their business, it's very stagnant, right? Or they're not focusing on the growth of the business that's happening. It might be like 2 years and you're seeing the same customers. You're not building more of an audience, whatever the case is. And clearly here, there is a problem that you need to solve. And what helps you with that? Well, it's in innovation. You have to be innovative in your thinking. And this applies to not just, again, as you said, scientists in the laboratories or the big fancy suits sitting on Wall Street. No, this applies to if you're a local shop owner, if you own a cafe, if you're trying to start off like a book club or something even. And these can all really tie into one another. And that's great. I kind of want to touch in on with you working with these big companies, right? What are often some of the problems that you see? Like, why do they come to you guys to begin with?
So in enterprises, in large companies, there's two different flavors of problems I've seen with things that hold them back from being creative. The first is more common, and it's this pervasive risk aversion in the organization. So large companies are large because they established a product market fit. They grew over sometimes long periods of time. And so they've optimized, and you end up in a situation where you're so optimized for productive outcomes. You're really efficient. Every last cog is aimed at producing, the output that your organization measures its success by. And so when you get to that situation, risks are pushed out of the organization.
Okay.
Risks are going to damage productivity. There's no reason to onboard any risk, and risk is completely necessary to be able to innovate. So the more common problem is risk aversion. Innovation isn't on anybody's job description. It's not a bullet point on a job description. The job descriptions are aimed at the productive outcomes of the organization. That's the first challenge. And the way you see it is disruption shows up, the organization's facing challenges, or they see them coming, and then the CEO starts giving speeches about innovation, and then it ends up on the values, like corporate values. These are our values.
Right.
One of them is now, the new one is innovation. And just because it's there, and then people try to innovate and they get fired. And
It's
then,
like, hey, you weren't allowed to do that.
Yeah.
We want you to think, but not think too much.
Exactly. It makes its way from these sort of speeches and statements into training programs, and then from there onto job descriptions and into the culture. That's kind of how that one unfolds for some large enterprises. The other challenge that shows up is a kind of chaos. So something like AOL is a good example of this. AOL had done a bunch of acquisitions over the years, so they're still around. They're a giant conglomerate of a bunch of other little small companies. There's lots of new things going on, but it is chaotic. And so it's messy. It isn't necessarily super organized. So they're not afraid of risk. They take risks all the time. They create new things. But there's no obvious strategy or direction, and you got different people pulling in different directions, and it gets messy. And that can be bad too in a different way. Namely, it's hard to steer a ship like that. You're trying to kind of steer an ecosystem or, things like that don't make sense. So they can afford to be a little bit more methodical in their approaches. It isn't obvious how that shows up. Sometimes it's just top-down leadership style. Sometimes it's grassroots. What we like to do is we like to come in and start with something called story mining.
Yeah. So how does this process work? So the companies come ask you, hey, we like what you're doing. We want this innovative consultancy program training kind of here with us. So take us through it. Like, what do you guys kind of do?
Like entrepreneurially?
Yeah.
So entrepreneurially, there's lead generation, and if there's a lead, our target audience is learning program managers. So if you're a learning manager, you work under a chief learning officer, and you're in charge of, like, let's say, senior management training.
Okay.
And so that's a target customer for us. So there are a variety of things we do on the marketing side to get in touch with those kinds of people. We nurture those relationships. This is a normal sales funnel. We demonstrate value as best we can, and eventually someone reaches out to us and they're interested in getting some program through, or they're interested in getting our advice on something. And so that's where we develop a proposal, make a pitch, and if they like it, they'll take us on. For many years, we had really good retention. If a client took us on, we were there for 5 years.
Wow.
Or something like that. So we deliver. We do good work. They ask us to come back. What was challenging about that marketing setup was that you don't get a lot of referrals. Maybe somebody leaves their position and moves to a different company and they take you with them, but then does the old organization keep you and does the new one want you? And it ends up becoming a pretty big challenge.
It goes back to that Pepsi Cola thing that you're talking about, right? Yeah. You don't want to give the competitors away the secrets.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's on that front.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So what I kind of also wanted to talk about, what are some of the cool projects that you guys do? Like at InnovationBound and stuff. What are the projects that you may not have, probably pitched out so much, but they're like more of like the low-key projects to inspire creativity?
Yeah, on your website it says you've been working with Fortune 500 companies, and like, what are those like?
So, okay, one of the most exciting ones we did for one of the tech companies, and this was an innovation tournament. So we built an innovation tournament inside of the company. And so the way this works is the organization assigns some seed funding, and they collect some directors, and then the training program is for their senior managers. So senior managers report into directors. Okay. So the senior managers go through the innovation tournament, the training program, and they go through a staged process. So they start by generating ideas for innovations. These could be new product ideas, new partnerships ideas, cost reduction plans, cultural change. It could be any kind of thing. And so they develop ideas. They form teams to work on those ideas. And then they pitch to a panel of their directors. So now they're pitching to their directors and they're collecting feedback. They're saying, oh, okay, our directors are helping us figure out how this fits in strategically. Or is this idea really profound and good, or does it need to change a certain way? So they're getting feedback. If the panel checks them off and they pass, they go to stage 2. Stage 2, they're developing tactics. It's like, okay, we like your idea, but how are you actually going to do this? And so then they go off and work on the tactics for that project. How are we actually going to pull off this innovation? What do we do here, 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 here? Who needs to be involved, et cetera? They pitch again to their panel of directors. And if they pass that stage, they go back and they have to do financials. So now they have to figure out how to calculate net present value or whatever metric the organization uses to evaluate the potential value of an innovation project. So now they're attaching numbers. Then they pitch again. And if the panel accepts them, they write them a check for $8 million to try the thing. I'm just kidding. They don't do that. They say, okay, well, it's a great idea. We like your numbers. It's probably worth it. How would you pilot this? How would you start? And so then they go off and they do a risk analysis. They look for who's going to assist and resist inside of the organization. They talk about a pilot or an experiment or a series of pilots and experiments. And what we try to do is teach them, when you're building those sort of first steps, you want to make sure failure is valuable. So spell out what is it you're trying to learn. And so if you do the pilot or you do the experiment and it doesn't tell you what you want initially, what's the gain? So you kind of want to create win-wins if you can. But anyway, that's the last stage. And they pitch again. And if they pass that final pitch, they get some seed funding to do their pilot project. The benefit of doing a program like that is that people are learning innovation by doing innovation. For this particular tech company, there was a partnership idea and a phone call and a first meeting and almost an acceptance, like before the program was over.
Wow.
So before the program was over, they'd already realized, like, I forget, it was a multi-million-dollar thing. They covered the costs of the training. I don't know about the hotel and flying all their senior managers in, the rest of whatever, but they covered the cost of the training right out of the gate. So it can be really valuable that way. And the move here was we used to do simulation training. We still do it. You sort of create a simulated scenario or a case study or a video game or some sort of simulation. But this was real. And the training landed way better. So that was a ton of fun. That's one example of something we did inside a company that was really effective, really fun, a cool way to do training that was inspiring to the people involved and gave them the skills they need. So now you had senior managers who were able to build business cases for making change inside their organizations.
Wow.
That's impressive. That's so impressive.
So yeah, regarding
lot of
like
fun.
making change and, you know, having an impact, like that's one way of doing so. I also know that you're a public speaker, you know, TEDx, the United Nations and so on. Have you ever felt like when you're giving your speech and you look at your audience, like, do you see this like light bulb, you know, light up in their heads and like they realize that, wow, this is a great idea. Like I just learned something new that I'm going to use for my venture.
Yeah. So one of the metrics I try to use for if we're doing a good job on my team on a project or whatever is, are we surprising people with their own creativity? Like, if that happens, that's a check. I've done my job for the day. Like, never mind the bottom line and the finances. Like, but if someone in the room goes, "Oh my God, it came out great!" Like, ding, ding, ding. I've won. That's a pat on my back for myself. That's what I'm in it for from a passion perspective. And that at this point I can see when that happens. Like I see it in the room. I also poll my rooms.
Okay.
So if I'm working with a group of scientists and they're developing ideas on how to build synthetic cells, that's a real example. Scientists are trying to do this right now. It's awesome and scary. So I will pull the room and ask them. They're looking at like a wall of Post-it notes of their potential research ideas. And I'll ask them, can I see a show of hands if everybody sees at least one idea they'd want to work on? All the hands go up. Okay. How about at least two? No hands go down. I go, at least three. And then some hands go down. I go, okay, that's probably enough. Let's move forward. So I'll gauge, if we have enough ideas, for example, based on something like that.
Have you ever had a time where there was someone who was very reluctant to the program, or it's like, what you're doing doesn't make any sense, I could just do this on my own, what are we here for?
All the time, yeah.
Really? And how do you deal with that?
You get mutinies. It's
Really?
gave one. This was fun once. We were at a workshop with NASA, yeah, and oh man, one of the clients had an emergency with the family or was sick, something like that. So we were missing one of the clients. We're running the program almost without them. One of them actually made it, so we were okay. But it was a bit of a last minute scare. And Andy introduces the agenda for the day. You've got a room full of scientists. He goes, we're going to do this first, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to break out into groups, and then we're going to come back and finish like this. It's not rocket science. Not that would be a problem. It's like thanks, Andy. What a great intro.
Right.
And so we don't even start the first activity and a bunch of hands go up and we're like, we need to spend more time on this. It was really sort of a grouchy crowd. And we were like, well, what if we try the agenda we had planned? And then if it doesn't work, by all means, we can make some changes. And we do often make changes. So those sort of reactions from audiences, they're really important. Mm-hmm. Like if you're working with a group and you have your planned activities and you do the first two and the feedback you're getting, or a lack of feedback, like if we do a full day and everyone's very polite and everything finishes on time, I immediately go to my client and I go, what is the conflict? Why aren't they, like, is there some sort of problem in the organization? Mm-hmm. Is there something that's not being talked about, et cetera? And they will tell me what it is.
Okay.
And if everyone's being polite and everything's finishing on time and everyone's got like their hands in their lap, there is some elephant in the room that nobody's talking about. Mm-hmm. Like I've learned to see wrong. That one. Yeah. So you definitely want that kind of feedback from a group. Like, so if you have an event with a planned agenda and it's all like from the front of the room forward, so presentations for like a TEDx event,
right?
Fine, great, run on time. It's all good. You're presenting from the front. People are listening. That's quite simple to go through. But if there's anything where people are rolling their sleeves up and they're doing actual work, I've never seen an agenda survive human contact. It's not supposed to.
Right.
You're supposed to bend and flex with the group you're working with.
Wow. I do. We're about to be finishing up soon, but before we do, I do want you to share the story that you've told me before, and it was about the birds. and
The
why.
cormorants.
Yes, and I want the audience to know why this is such an interesting story, and why it can spark creativity within somebody.
Yeah, so this was a fun one. So there's a gentleman on my team named Andrew.
Right. Shout out Andrew.
Andrew James Ferris. And Andrew and I were interested in these birds. So if you go they're all over the world, but we found them in San Diego. He lives in San Diego. We went to La Jolla Cove, and there's a cliff over there, and these birds nest there. They're called cormorants. They also nest in lots of places around the world. They're very common. I've seen them in New York. I've seen them in Florida. I've seen them in Greece. They're quite common by the water, by the ocean. And they're interesting in the sense that they don't fly very well. Their bones are dense. Their bones are too heavy. They kind of fly really badly. They're not good at being birds, but they're really good at being underwater.
Wow.
They dive hundreds of feet. They can hold their breath for minutes at a time. They hunt in the water. And so we got really interested in them. We were trying to swim with them. We got some footage. And we're like, what do we do with this? Like, we enjoy this, but what can we make a documentary? Like, what's going to be the thing? And Andrew hit the idea when it was somewhere in the pandemic, and there was this scare around children visiting grandparents. Mm-hmm. It was a really frightening idea to get grandma sick and so forth. So we're like, wow, the kids can't see their grandparents. What can we do? And Andrew was like, well, what if we make a book, like a video book, that stops, the video pauses at each page, and the child can read the page and record their own voice. And they hit a button, they go to the next page, and they go all the way through. And at the end, they have this book narrated by them. Like, we'll pre-make the book, but they can narrate it. And so it becomes, authored by Rachel Vincent, who's our author, illustrated by Andrew James Ferris, and then narrated by you, whoever the kid is. And then you could send that to grandma, or vice versa. Wow. Grandma can read and send it to the kid or something like that. Wow. So that was the idea. We've been working on it for a little while. We just got a really big update on the tech side today, which is very cool. So this actually works.
Wow.
We've got the tech built, so we're really happy about that. And it's just a product we built on top of this, like this creature that we're passionate about. And the lesson in the book is be yourself. Like, here's this bird that's like,
it's supposed to be a bird and fly.
Yeah, exactly. But like, that's not how it's built. It's built to swim. That's what it loves to do, and so forth. And they do that. And so this question you started us off with, who are you? Well, these birds answer this question in a really beautiful way, and they act that lesson out. They know thyself, so to speak. Mm-hmm. If we could take it all the way to the ancient wisdom. And so they're inspiring. We took their inspiration and tried to sort of fly with it.
Well, Costa, I must say, go ahead. Thank you so much for joining us today on this show. I mean, you've dropped some incredible knowledge about what it means to be creative, what it means to be an innovator, and how people at home can really do this themselves. Mm-hmm. I kind of want to dedicate a couple minutes for you. Where can these people find you? Where can they find the course? And what are some projects that you're excited about coming forward?
Yeah, there's a lot. We always do so much. We do too much at a time, but that's okay. We tend to complete what we start. So I think the coolest place to start is the Innovation 101 course. It's designed to ease people in and teach them the basic skills and how to use them in your day-to-day life. Mm-hmm. So Innovation 101, so innovationbound.com/101, that's the course. And what we do is, it's an early bird program right now. The course is still being built piece by piece. Mm-hmm. And so if you come in early bird, you pay like less than half the cost or whatever, and you just give feedback as we go. And sort of that's the deal. You get a discount, give us a little bit of feedback as we go, and make the course better and better. You can also drop your email address in there, and we'll send you a notification when the full course is out at full price. That's the Innovation 101 course. What's attached to it are some live sessions and some social media training. Those will be open. So we're going to try to do a live session every week. The first one's coming up on Monday. This will not be published when it's posted, so there might be a recording of it you can watch if you'd like. That'll be called How to Be an Innovation Secret Agent, which is basically like, how do you practice this stuff in real life? Like just in your day-to-day life. One super old school hack is carry around a notebook. Any of these innovators from like 400 years ago carried around a notebook and wrote down their ideas. It's just an old, easy hack for how do you like just do it in your day-to-day life. So we'll do some live sessions. Those will be open. And then the social media, if you follow at InnovationBound on Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn, what we're going to do is we're going to start posting some bite-sized training content. So if you're scrolling through social media, rotting your brain, and you come across a little creativity exercise, you might do some repair work and then scroll and rot some more. So that's the idea, is can we introduce a little bit of this into people sort of day to day? Yeah.
Well, again, thank you so much for coming up on the show. I truly enjoyed this show. Do you guys have any other closing remarks?
I just want to say thank you so much for coming through. It's been a hell of a conversation. Thank you so much, Costa. This is going to be amazing for our members and the audiences watching.
Absolutely.
Really
Thank you, gentlemen.
Really appreciate it.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you.
A round
And
of
guys,
applause.
yes, please. And guys, this was another beautiful episode of CEO's The Vault podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you guys tune in next time.
Awesome. All right.